When you hear the word cartel, what comes to mind? A gang, a group of killers and criminals. Well, you're not wrong. However, one thing you should know about cartels is they usually live by a code, and rogue members face terrible judgment. Well, in this case, 5 rogue cartel members did the unthinkable, and sadly, 4 innocent Americans had to pay for it, some with their lives. For the past 15 years, American men, women, and even children have been picked off the streets of Mexico at will by unscrupulous individuals. Kidnapped, beaten, maimed, and even killed for little to no reason. In 2021 alone, there have been 625 reported cases of these kidnappings. But it gets worse. In 2022, reports have shown that the number has dramatically climbed to about 1,721 reported cases. A cause for concern, no doubt. But in all these cases, usually the motives are pretty clear. Ransom money. However, a more recent case of 4 American citizens being abducted has caused quite a stir. The peculiarities of this particular incident are both concerning and puzzling. On the 3rd of March 2023, a video clip from a street corner camera captured live moments when 4 U.S. citizens were being kidnapped by heavily armed but unknown gunmen in broad daylight. The 4 victims, Latvia Washington McGee, Eric Williams, Shahid Woodward, and Zindell Brown, were ambushed in the white minivan they had been driving in, having a North Carolina license plate. In the video, the 5 gunmen could be seen forcing the Americans into their vehicle as other cars zoomed past, seemingly oblivious to what was going on. First, they pushed one of the victims, a female, up into their vehicle. Then another male. A few seconds later, they dragged 2 other bodies which appeared to be unconscious into their vehicle as well. Moments later, they climbed into their white pickup truck and zoomed off. Now, the tape was eventually posted on Twitter, and soon it went viral like wildfire. Soon after, the U.S. law enforcement confirmed and announced the kidnap.
I'm working very closely with other federal partners and Mexican law enforcement agencies.
Obviously, both the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and the Mexican government were seriously concerned by this horrible incident. They realized they had to work together to catch these criminals, and they put all hands on deck to make sure justice was served and the Americans would be rescued. But they were not just all talk. To show how serious and committed they were to finding the 4 Americans, they urged for the help of the general public, and a $15,000 reward was announced for anyone who could return the victims, as well as any information that could lead to the finding and subsequent arrest of their assailants. And so, for the next few days, through searches and investigations kicked off the rescue of the 4 Americans. Finally, after several efforts, the investigation finally made their first headway and breakthrough. The day was March 7, 2023, and it was in the early hours of the morning when the 4 Americans were found, but it was at the most peculiar and unusual place, in a wooden shed outside the city. However, despite how great this was, there was little to celebrate. Sadly, even though they had finally been found, they were not all in one piece. 2 of them were found inside the shed. However, they were seriously injured, one of them having bullet wounds on both of his legs, and the remaining 2 certified dead from gunshot wounds. Really sad indeed, but this raises a lot of questions, doesn't it? Who were these perpetrators? What did they want? How could they have carried out the kidnap in broad daylight? All of these questions will be answered, but first, let's address what exactly the 4 Americans were doing in Mexico in the first place. Before and even after the investigations and the victims were found, there had been a lot of speculation and whispers as to why exactly the Americans were in Mexico at all. It was common knowledge that Mexico was a particularly dangerous place, especially for Americans, judging from all the recent events and kidnaps.
Do not travel. We encourage.
But thankfully, the family and friends of the victims were able to shed light on the real reason they were in Mexico. According to the report given by the sister of Zindell Brown, one of the victims, the 4 Americans were friends and they had agreed to accompany McGee, another of the victims, to Mexico because she had scheduled cosmetic surgery there, a tummy tuck. She also added that she had warned her brother over and over again not to make the trip to Mexico as she believed it was too dangerous. But they didn't listen because they thought going together as a group would increase their chances of being safe and returning unharmed. Throwing more light on the incident, a close friend of Zindell Brown, who didn't want to be named, mentioned that Zindell and the rest had booked a hotel just outside of Texas, close to the U.S.-Mexico border. But it was when McGee's mother spoke to the media that a lot of hearts broke. According to her, McGee was a mother of 6 and had been to Mexico before to do the same surgery. This second visit was merely a correctional one, and she was saddened by the fact that 2 of her daughter's friends had lost their lives for the sake of her daughter, who was still in critical condition at the time. While newsmen spoke with her, she mentioned that she had gotten some details of what happened from her daughter, and it was one of the saddest and horrific things she had ever heard. Apparently, the 4 friends had been driving in their white minivan when from nowhere, a pickup truck pulled up beside their vehicle. At first, they didn't think anything of it, but the windows of the truck suddenly wound down to reveal 5 heavily armed gunmen. Before the Americans could fully understand their predicament, the men opened fire right at them, directing the bullets right inside their vehicle. They kept shooting until the 4 friends got hit at the same time, and the vehicle inevitably swerved off the road and crashed. According to McGee, as soon as they crashed, she watched in horror as 2 of her friends let out their last breath and died instantly on the spot. But the rather interesting twist came as a result of how the police were alerted to the missing Americans. According to the surviving victims, there was supposed to be a 5th member of their group, Cheryl Orange. Cheryl had been with the friends all along and had even been with them in the hotel they had booked in preparation for their trip. But in an unfortunate turn of events for her, the only reason she hadn't followed them into Mexico was because she had forgotten her ID back at the hotel and it was too late to go back and get it. So right at the border, a new agreement was reached. The 4 friends would go ahead to accompany McGee into Mexico, leave her at the hands of her doctors, and return to the border where Cheryl would be waiting. It was a solid plan. They didn't think there was any way it could go wrong, especially since the whole thing was estimated to take about 15 minutes tops. If only they had known how wrong they were. So as soon as the friends left, Cheryl Orange waited patiently for them to return. But after 15 minutes had elapsed, she began to get worried. All she could think about was all the evils that could possibly have befallen her friends. She tried reaching them, but she couldn't. However, despite how concerned she was, she decided to wait until the end of the day. Perhaps they had decided to stay over in Mexico for some reason. But she soon found out she was wrong, because by the morning, she couldn't reach her friends, and they were nowhere to be found. She couldn't wait any longer, so she alerted the police. The investigation. As soon as the investigations kicked off, the authorities soon realized that prior to the attack, the 4 friends had made it well into the city. But seeing as they were visitors, they had gotten terribly lost and had kept driving around in circles hoping to find their way to the hospital. On top of that, McGee had been trying to reach her doctor for directions, but reception was very poor. It was in their frantic search to find their way back that the gunman cornered them, opened fire, and subsequently loaded the Americans into their truck before disappearing from sight. Eventually, when the Mexican authorities first visited the scene, they noticed the North Carolina license plate, and it was in that moment they realized that this was way bigger than a local issue. They quickly alerted the U.S. authorities in Mexico to join the investigation. The Joint Task Force got every piece of DNA they could and checked every security footage they could lay their hands on. The results, they were surprisingly able to pinpoint where the abductors were hiding. However, this was not the criminals' first rodeo. They stayed one step ahead of the authorities, making their search even more difficult by changing locations from time to time, leading the police on a wild goose chase. But all these aside, it's time to answer an even bigger question. Who were these gunmen, and how come they had the audacity to carry out a kidnapping in broad daylight? This is where the story gets a little more interesting. The Gulf Cartel, Tamaulipas, Mexico. To the untrained eye, it looks like any other city with bustling commerce, lively people, and an energetic atmosphere. It is also located near the U.S. border, so it's not out of the ordinary for U.S. citizens around Brownsville and Texas to frequent the Mexican city to buy goods at a cheaper rate and even receive medical care or other forms of services. In fact, sometimes the two countries meet in a location central to them, the South Padre Island, to party and have a great time. But all of these are a thing of the past, the distant past, because for the past 15 years, the city has gone from being a safe haven for commerce and relations to being one of the most dangerous cities in the world. Why? Because of the presence of the most powerful gang in all of Mexico, the Gulf Cartel. Because of the proximity to the border, the Gulf Cartel is involved in the dealing of hard drugs and smuggling in and out of the American states. Over the years, they have grown so large and so powerful, they have even extended their reach past Houston, Texas, into New York and other major cities in the U.S. But that is not the problem here, and that is not why Tamaulipas is a dangerous city. You see, after existing for so many years, the Gulf Cartel, based on leadership disagreements and the need to spread and decentralize, has dissolved into groups and factions. Now, ordinarily, this wouldn't be much of a problem. However, each faction believes they should be the superior one, and as a result, there are usually a lot of gang fights and wars between the Gulf Cartel factions. The most prominent of these factions is the Los Zetas, who have grown large and powerful in their own right and have become one of the most feared gangs in all of Mexico. These gangs have also recruited former soldiers and equipped them with state-of-the-art weapons, as well as tripled their compensations. As a result, the cartel has built a cult-like loyalty among its members. But all these things are well and good. If we go back to the story of the four Americans, another question seems to be burning to be asked. Were the four U.S. citizens abducted by one of these factions? And if so, what did they want with them? The abductors. On March 3, 2023, when the four American citizens disappeared without a trace, panic ensued, but no one could say for certain who had committed this heinous crime. However, the whispers in the shadows pointed ominously toward the Gulf Cartel, a notorious criminal organization, yet proof remained elusive. Days turned into an agonizing search, a desperate quest for answers in a land where uncertainty seemed to be the only certainty. Despite the grim outlook, there was a glimmer of hope. Hope that the missing Americans would be found unharmed and that justice would prevail. Then, on the 7th of the same harrowing month, a breakthrough occurred. The missing Americans were discovered, their fate uncertain, but their whereabouts were known. Yet, perplexingly, the shroud of mystery still hung heavily. Who had masterminded this sinister plot? Why had they taken these innocent lives? These answers remained concealed, hidden behind a wall of secrecy and treachery. In a plot twist worthy of a Hollywood thriller, the Gulf Cartel stepped out of the shadows and took full responsibility for the abductions. But this wasn't a typical cartel admission of guilt. In a letter that would send shockwaves through the nation, they revealed that the kidnappers were not just members of their criminal empire. They were rogue elements who had flagrantly violated the cartel's cardinal rule, the rule not to take innocent lives. Intriguingly, the cartel claimed they couldn't abide such actions, and to prove their commitment to their code, they took a startling step. The 5 gang members responsible for the kidnapping were tied up, like trophies, in a truck and left for the authorities to apprehend. It was a theatrical gesture of accountability, a bizarre twist in a tale filled with uncertainty. What was even more shocking was that, according to the reports, the attack on the Americans was nothing but a big misunderstanding. Apparently, the rogue cartel members had mistaken the Americans as spies or members of one of their rival factions, and so decided to lead a coordinated attack to abduct them. Sadly, they had killed 2 of the Americans before they realized what had happened, and so essentially, the deaths and abductions were all for nothing. Soon, these men found themselves on a journey they never could have anticipated. They were extradited to the United States, where the wheels of justice began to turn. The American authorities sought to label the Gulf Cartel as terrorists, a move that could have far-reaching consequences. However, the Mexican president resisted, citing concerns about national sovereignty. The question that arose from this standoff was one that still echoes in the minds of many. Why was the Mexican government hesitant to take a stronger stance against the cartel? One can't help but wonder, is it fear that holds them back, a fear of the cartel's reach and power? Or could there be something more insidious at play, an underhanded partnership that stretches deep into the corridors of power? It's a question that lingers, haunting the collective consciousness of those who dare to delve into the shadowy world of cartels and government intrigue. Who's next? As we navigate this labyrinthine narrative, one thing becomes clear: the truth is often stranger than fiction. In this real-life drama, where facts blur with speculation, we may never know the full extent of the Mexican government's involvement, if any, with the Gulf Cartel. The story of the abduction of 4 Americans in Mexico remains an enigma, an unsolved puzzle that defies easy answers. As the dust settled on the harrowing abduction of 4 American citizens in Mexico, a chilling reality began to dawn on the collective consciousness of the United States. Kidnappings of American citizens, once a distant concern, had suddenly hit uncomfortably close to home. The dangers lurking south of the border sent shivers down the spines of every single American citizen. In a world where intentional borders can sometimes feel like mere lines on a map, the prospect of falling victim to criminal organizations like the Gulf Cartel is a nightmare that few can ignore. The heart-wrenching story of the 4 Americans served as a stark reminder that the perils of Mexico's underworld can touch anyone, anywhere. The questions that now linger are as unsettling as they are profound. Is this the last we've seen of such abductions, or could this be an ominous beginning of a more troubling trend? Will the Gulf Cartel retreat into the shadows, licking their wounds and biding their time? Or will they continue to brazenly challenge the authorities? These questions gnaw at the collective conscience of a nation. The influence of the Gulf Cartel casts a long and foreboding shadow over the safety of Americans. This criminal organization, with deep pockets, extensive networks, and ruthless tactics, represents a formidable threat not only to Mexico, but also to its neighbor to the north. The cartel's power extends far beyond smuggling drugs. It encompasses human trafficking, extortion, and violence on a scale that is nothing short of alarming. For Americans, this influence translates into an unsettling reality. It means that their safety, even within their own borders, can be compromised. The Gulf Cartel's brazen admission of responsibility in the abduction of the 4 Americans serves as a stark reminder that their reach knows no bounds. It suggests a willingness to go to extremes to protect their interests and enforce their code of conduct, however twisted it may be. As Americans grapple with the chilling uncertainty of what the future holds, they are left with a profound realization. The border that separates the nation of Mexico is no guarantee of safety. In this complex and evolving narrative, the Gulf Cartel's influence continues to loom large, leaving a disconcerting question mark over the safety of Americans, both at home and abroad. The question remains, who's next?